question on like, so the one we had here is, I'll try and keep this short. New listener to the office hours, inspired to ask this in Slack from the segment we had on finding a mentor a number of weeks ago. So he writes, my day job is with a team focused on AWS, doing traditional operations and some light automation work. I haven't been given a roughly defined roadmap on how to succeed in this type of role or career, and I'm curious how other people have gotten to where they are in their space, in their own ways. So, what's some of the advice you guys have to pay forward to be successful in your career doing DevOps type stuff? Especially maybe when you aren't provided a guideline for how to be successful in it. You have to carve your own path.
I think the other big distinction is coming from a background of ops.
Right.
I think most DevOps people come from a background of dev, but this guy's coming from a background of ops.
Yeah, more traditional ops, very conceivably, yeah.
So I kind of came from a little bit of an ops background, so maybe I could share for a couple minutes. It might be helpful.
Yeah.
So I started playing with computers. I'm sure like many of you in this group, we're all pretty passionate about what we do, which is why we're here. And I started playing with computers as a kid, trying to get a Counter-Strike server up and running for the longest time. It took me much longer than it would take today. It took me an hour now. It took me a year before trying to figure out how Linux worked, get it installed, all that fun stuff. Long story short, I did some financial work straight out of school and got some data engineering. And shortly after I left that company, got into another company where I became the lead analytics developer. It's a startup, so you get whatever title you want.
Exactly.
I didn't know shit about what I was doing, but I was their lead analytics developer and knew nothing about predictive or any of that stuff. The reason I bring all that up is I got thrown into this role as their analytics guy. Their dev team that I was working side by side with cannot get deployments out the door. Their deployments would typically fail, and me being the analytics guy, I was not getting clean data. So to fix the data problem, I had to fix the deployment problem, and basically injected myself into the deployment process and used whatever little operational knowledge I had, realizing RDP copy and paste for production deployment is a bad idea, and getting them set up with, I'm sure some of you guys would laugh, being FTP, but FTP is a better step than RDP, and then going from FTP to the Azure native solution, which I think still uses FTP, but is a little cleaner, and then setting up some plumbing around it. So really, the approach I took was, here are problems I'm facing in my role. How do I fix them? I have to go fix these other problems that no one else is fixing. And then since then, that was at least 5 or 6 years ago, I've pretty much gone down that path. And then as to the comment around a mentor, I didn't necessarily have anyone to tell me how subnetting worked or how to set up an AWS VPC. I went on Udemy and other online courses, learned a thing or two about subnetting. If you threw subnet my way or CIDR range, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. And I'm leading a team to this day on DevOps stuff, but I'm no network expert. That being said, found some shortcuts and found some tools online, courses online to help me upskill in the areas that I'm lacking. With AWS these days, you don't really need to know, you don't need a CCNA to provision a network in AWS. They've abstracted so much of it. Understanding how route tables work, security groups, stuff like that, the basics can go a very long way. Like I said, I'm managing global infrastructure now, so I can assure you I'm not a network engineer. And that being said, having the right mentor, not necessarily a mentor, but having the right boss can go a long way.
Yeah, supportive of you learning and enabling, giving you the resources, yeah.
Yeah, and Udemy is a great resource. Pluralsight is great. I'm a little biased because I used to work there. And yeah, just online courses, I feel like, is a great way to kind of upskill on some of the stuff that you're lacking. Doesn't necessarily tell you all the best practices, but it'll give you that hello world that you're looking for. And then forums like this, user groups like we're in right now, is a great place to ask questions. But really being in the right environment, I would say if you're on a team, try, like, I mean, this might be a bad idea, but if you have extra cycles, go to a startup, get thrown on the deep end, and you're going to learn by trial by fire. And honestly, that's probably the quickest way if you want to accelerate your career. But yeah, so hopefully that little rant helps someone.
Yeah, I think that was really valuable insight. And if I distill it down to a few key points that you brought up there, one, I think, is your environment is going to shape you, and the organization you're in right now, if you feel like they probably aren't doing things the way you think might be the more modern way. Like, there's a better answer to this stuff, but they're just not seeing it or doing it. At your position, at the stage in your career, it might be very difficult to try and change that. And why waste your sweat on that when there's so many other opportunities out there? So I would instead roll the dice, seek out other opportunities at startups, because that's where you get the trust. Because enterprises, it looks good on the title, but you don't get the experience, and you're very limited on how much lateral movement you have there. So my experience, my whole life, my whole career has been working at startups. I have never gone through a front door interview and passed. It's always been just by working with startups, working with companies, making yourself useful, and learning and growing through that. I think the self-starter attitude is really important, but you can't study and learn this stuff in the abstract. You can't say, okay, I'm just going to learn Terraform and read a book. And well, I think for most people, that's not the most effective way. You have to have a purpose with all of this stuff. So find yourself the side project that you've been wanting to do and make that your purpose. And then you learn these tools.
Can I say something about mentorship real quick?
Yeah, please, Jim.
So I at one point tried to start a kind of nonprofit foundation for kind of matchmaking professionals and kind of like young people in that profession. And what I learned from that experience was that was a couple of things, but one of the things is that mentors are in abundance. People really want to give back. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
That was not hard to find at all. What was hard to find though was mentees that showed up consistently on time, that because they generally tend to be younger too and less experienced,
Yeah.
so haven't learned all those lessons, those soft skills for being responsible, for being accountable, for valuing other people's time,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So what I would like to say is that, like, if you're seeking out a mentor, they're out there. You simply got to ask. But then once you do ask and they agree to work with you, honor your time, respect their time, be there, and take the pains to be active in communication, and that will really and I think you'll find that there are resources out there that you don't realize are resources, is what I'm trying to get at. But then to honor that, so that actually works out.
That happens so often, especially with there's a lot of psychological payoff just committing to that you're going to do something and setting up that you're going to have this mentor or that you're making change. And then you got that psychological reward and you don't follow through and keep it up. So keep in mind that happens, and the rest of it is going to be harder. You're going to have to study, you're going to have to follow through. But yeah, commitment, professionalism, and consistency.
I'd 100% agree with Jim and what you said, Eric. And then just kind of reinforcing, if he's listening, just he or she is listening, but make time, because there's somebody that I'm mentoring and he's like, hey, can we push it back to next week and next week? And weeks turn into months, and they're like, oh, I'm busy with this. But if you truly want to make a difference and get out of this kind of rut that you may or may not be in currently, you have to, potentially sacrifice the rut that you're in now to make time for yourself. And I think it's one thing that I hate to see, especially with this one person I'm working with now, where I just you have to work at 9 o'clock at night sometimes, but I'm willing to go that extra mile. And I think, Jim, that was your point too. There's so many people that are willing to help, but
Yeah.
truly making time, I think you have to just say screw you, boss, or whoever's kind of preventing you from.
It's got to become a priority that you are willing to say no to other things that come up if it's that important. This is your future in the end.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
I think
if I could add to that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Todd, go ahead.
Usually I try to tie a dollar amount to things to make them important. So to somebody else's point earlier, if they're talking to someone in an enterprise and they're having a hard time forwarding their ideas, right? And you come up with a tale of two scenarios. Here's the way you're doing it. Here's the way you could be doing it. And this could be the cash that you save, by changing a process. That makes it more important to the other person, right? But that also works when you're trying to mentor someone. You say, listen, you're making $1.25 now. How'd you like to make $160 a year, right? All right, then show up. And if you don't, you'll get tired of being broke someday. I'm not going to press you. Right? And you can kind of leave it like a buffet, and they'll come back to the buffet when they're, tired of being broke. I know a lot of like really super like ridiculously talented young people who pick this up in a very short amount of time, but it's gotta be the priority for them, right? And usually that priority is driven by a couple of things, and typically it's making more money. LA that's a hard place to live.
It is, yeah.
Economically very unforgiving, so that's a big motivator.
California.
So I have some other advice that might actually be seem obvious, but it never happens enough. And that is, don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I think that should be not only for new people, but everyone at every stage of their career. I've been in this business for like, I don't know, a couple, almost 3 decades now, or 2.5 decades. And I'm pretty new to the Cloud Posse team. And you can, Eric will attest that I probably, every time we get on a call, I ask 150 different questions, and it's basically clarify for this for me. Why are we doing it this way? Have you considered doing this? Has it looked at it this way? Can you explain the reasoning behind that to me? And that all of those things, while you may have some like imposter syndrome, feel that you don't know something, in the long run, you're going to be a much more well-rounded person and understand the domain you're working in so much more, because you got those questions answered and clarified in your own head, not just the way that you expect that someone else thinks that you should know, what the answer to that is. So I would always keep that in mind.
No, that's a really great tidbit to lower one's pride a little bit, be open to these things. Also, asking questions, make sure you really understand in your own head, right? That you got it. And
that's like framing the problem domain in your own mind is like 99% of the problem. So the other real quick thing I was going to add to that was on the person who asked that question's original thing said, I'm doing operations and some light automation. I would turn that to heavy automation. Anytime you see something that you're doing more than a couple of times manually, you should be thinking this is an automation opportunity, and how can I do that? Not only will that help you understand the task that you're doing, because you have to figure out how to automate it, but it will also free you up to learn additional things and grow your career and work into different domains, because you've automated the thing that you don't have to manually go and click the button on 100 more times next week.
That's a really good point.
Automate your way out of a job is like the advice I received so long ago, and I love it.
You'll never fully succeed, so you'll still have a job. Don't worry.
Exactly.
Just higher order problems.
I remembered hearing that before. I pulled out my SRE book and I looked at the section, and it talks about how Google places a 50% cap on their SREs doing ops work, and the rest of it is development of automation and stuff.
Yeah, so they call it's a toil budget is how that's referred to there. So basically no more than 50% of your work on toil and 50% on automation and improving process.
Eric, I had just at one point really. Something that I've found that has been really successful for me in the last few years, especially as we've changed from like, the wall has sort of come down. It used to be like everybody else was on the other side of the wall and we did everything. And now we're automating stuff so that everybody else can do it. So, the sort of, there's been a pivot in the whole industry and in many ways what we do. And, but the point I want to make is that I go out of my way to make sure that I am available and telling people what's going on. I set up like 2 meetings. We have a client SFTP site, expensive ass AWS transfer family SFTP site that every one of our customers is using. So I reached out to my product people and I'm like, you guys, why don't I spend a half an hour with you and show you what this looks like from the user? show you how we set it up, because you guys are going to be receiving the keys and you want to know what they are. I'm going to do a command line version. I'll do a GUI version. Do not promise customers that we will support them on their side with this, but giving, you know, my CEO registered for this like 45-minute talk, but you know, make sure to like go out of my way to make sure that people are educated, because the developers we work with are really smart and they want to know, they want background. So just going out of your way to do that has been really successful for me in forging relationships and offloading work, because now they freaking get it. And you know, a few things like that.
Yeah. So one little quick way to spin that maybe is, it's not exactly what you said. It's similar though. It's like managing up. It's also making sure everyone knows what you're doing and enrolling other people in what you've done to get their input and get them excited about things.